We are black and white, aren't we? Way the big government should be black and white.
Town, they called, so they couldn't hear, things like that.
Gotta stretch it out. Don't blow it out one time.
Apparently I'm Mr. Eagle Eyes. I got my road trip planned to please select Wisconsin still.
Call the Monday, February 26th council meeting, study session to order. Have a roll call, please.
Bergen.
Here.
Drinkow.
Here.
Kangas.
Here.
McKenzie.
Here.
Rathi. Here. Scherer.
Here.
Waldstein.
Yes, I'm here.
All present and accounted for. I take a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion, council discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor of the agenda as presented, say yes.
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 Those opposed? 7-0. Agenda is approved. Have an item of business to take care of, to recognize some citizens for their past service to the community. Carlo, if you would join me. Looks like Tammy McKenzie is the young lady that's here. To Tammy McKenzie for her participation on the Economic Development Commission. Present you a plaque, and thank you very much for your service to the community.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. So,
Thank you, Mayor.
thank you. That's it. Thank you. There actually are 3 other recipients besides Tammy. One of them at least got caught in Atlanta this morning, couldn't get a flight out. So for various reasons, and we'll catch them at another time when they can make their presence to us. So we certainly appreciate the service to the community that each of them have done. Next item on the agenda is public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here that has something they'd like to lay on the council for future discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on. Study session calendar. Item 1 is an update on the Economic Development Commission, or from the Economic Development Commission. So whoever's in charge,
That's me.
be
I'm not
Mr. Egley.
going to cover the whole book. Make that clear. Don't worry. Short and sweet here. First of all, I want to add congratulations to Tammy and her, thanks for serving. We served the last couple of years on the commission together, and she was a valuable contributor. So, I'm Steve Egley, and I just become the chair of the commission, and so it fell to me to come and explain ourselves tonight. And I just want to talk a little bit about who the commission is and what is involved in our work for economic development, and a little bit about the recent things we've been working on, and then some things that we intend to be focusing on. And I hope that, Bill, did you include in the packet the current roster of participants on the commission? I just thought that it was, oh, good, good. And I don't know if your version shows that we have a commission of 9 members and voting members. And they are drawn, they're appointed by the mayor or recruited by the mayor to participate, and with your involvement, and that the idea of this selection is simply that you want to get people that represent some of the diversity of the community, people that are involved and have various perspectives on the community and what it might take to produce economic development in it. So, but in addition to the 9 members who are kind of drafted for that very reason, the commission currently also has non-voting members, and they all participate as regularly as the voting members in the monthly meetings and in some of the underlying work of the commission. And the reason for those people participating is just to amplify the diversification and make sure that we have a chance to reach out to many significant parts of the community, and that we bring that to bear in our advisory work to the staff, as well as any recommendations that we might bring before you, that we are a group that has that kind of perspective, and hopefully it therefore makes it worthwhile to consider what we've come up with. And apart from that, we also have as regular participants members of the city staff, Mr. Bronner, Mr. Connie Tolan, and Bill Werger. So that's our merry band that meets once a month across the hall and considers things about economic development. And in that regard, it's kind of interesting, I think, to think about what economic development entails. And I think that there's been a transformation from the time, probably about 40 years ago, somewhere back in the 80s, when it was deemed appropriate to form a group focusing on economic development. It was a privately financed group at the time. I don't know, the city may have contributed some money, but it was largely a group of financial people, other business people that formed a group, and Roger Stevenson, I think, was our first and fairly long-term leader of that group. And since that time, it's morphed into different types of organizations involved with the chamber, and then in these later years, a city-sponsored organization. And I think over that time that we've seen some change in what is involved in producing economic development. I think initially, it's my recollection, you can check yours, but I think economic development back in the initial time was trying to recruit new business to town, and we developed industrial parks to give them space. We even put up, the approach included spec buildings at that time, which the mayor pointed out at a recent meeting was sort of successful, but it took time. Rada moved into a building that we had spec'd in the industrial part out by the sale barn area. But it wasn't long before we realized that producing growth from business needed to also focus on our local business, that as they were probably as likely or more likely to be interested in expansion here and building on their success here as you were to go out and get somebody that's completely new to the area. And those two things needed to be a part of the effort. And for a long time, and still today, of course, that's a big part of the focus of the commission, those things. But what does it take to produce development? And I think that's also what has changed. It involves not only going out and trying to contact people and get their interest to come and start a business here or expand or renew their business here, but it also takes considering other types of factors like the amenities of the community, the recreation and entertainment aspects of the community. I heard a radio broadcast tonight just as I was coming home from the office where the newest thing that I've heard about, and I had not heard at all about this, was the establishment of quiet zones in your town or city that makes it more livable. And in fact, they had statistics that for every 10 degrees of decibel reduction you had, you got 5% of growth. I mean, I thought that was really I wonder who gathered that statistic. But, you know, it's just a lot more things. It's housing, considering your housing needs. It's what does it take in the way of daycare or elder care, or what kind of things like that help us to grow as a community and offer a quality of life. And so it's become a little bit more comprehensive subject over the years, and I think rightly so. And if you focus on some of the recent activities of the commission that the commission's been involved with the staff, I think you'll see that reflected. One of our more recent developments was developing a housing strategy, which was presented to the city council. I'm sure most of you, or many of you, are familiar with this document, the housing strategy. I think it was presented last February or so. And the result of an outgrowth of discussion in the community about, well, do we have an adequate amount of housing? You know, what do we have available for different groups? And the strategy came down to kind of inventorying various categories of housing, from luxury housing down to starter homes, to rental, housing for elderly, various categories of housing, and considering how are we doing with them, and what do we have adequate amounts, and how would we go about influencing that if we have needs in those areas. And I think it's been a very useful tool, and we've seen in housing, for example, a great deal of progress in the community over that time. The downtown upper story development project is one. The CUNA building conversion to apartments is another. Other apartments in the community, along with the luxury housing developments and new additions, focus on the flood areas and getting those areas to where they're out of the flood zone and can be built. I think we really have had a useful focus on that over the last few years, and culminating in a very nice piece of work. I think that I hope you're familiar with it. I think you'll find it instructive as you think about things that might come before you concerning building and all that, to see how it might fit into that pattern and why it might help us grow. We also helped staff develop an incentive strategy, which was adopted by the council last February, to deal with, you know, what should be, before somebody comes knocking on our door to ask for some help with whatever kind of project they might bring to town, what are some of our parameters? You know, what are people doing? And what might be appropriate for us to consider, and getting a consensus on what the tools might be in connection with that, so that when we bring something to council or through the commission and to council, that we have an idea of what kind of tools we're wanting to play with in that regard. We've helped to formulate some development agreements over the recent period of time, including the former Lutheran Mutual building. That was something that was put together pursuant to that kind of thinking. The Terex plant and the sale of that property to CMI road building, and I think that personally was a great success that was facilitated greatly by city staff, by the commission staff, as much or more than the commission itself. They just really went to work and solved the problems in connection with that sale, including being able to salvage the 100 or so employee Terex, what is the financial?
Local business services.
Right, and keep them here, and they now rent from the current owner. I remember how how I felt when when Terex was going out and we didn't know what was coming in, and I think of how we filled that hole. You got to sit back and kind of acknowledge your successes sometime. I sure think that's one, and pay attention to what got that and what worked to help facilitate that. So those are the things of the recent past that I think were of interest and took time of the commission. So what are we doing now? There's a couple main areas right now that are under, I think, the attention of a lot of people. One is providing sites for new and expanding businesses and industry. Our industrial or our business parks are substantially full. We don't have space for some types of sized businesses to move here who want to move in now. But in that regard, and in that regard, I think the philosophy has really changed to think long and hard about whether you're going to go out like we did in the old days and buy land and put in infrastructure and then sit around hoping they will, if we build it, will they come? You know, it's a lot of money in the ground, and you know, from here as well as just driving through communities across the state, that you can see an awful lot of empty parks on the edge of towns that have infrastructure there. And I think we're a little less likely to want to do that, but we do want to identify areas that we might be interested in. If we had somebody that was wanting to develop, enlarge their business, expand their business, bring their business here, to know ahead of time what we think would be good areas to suggest that fit within the plans, what it would take to engineer them, to do some advanced work so that while we're not building it ahead of time, we've got some pretty good ideas of what might be needed there and where we would get it and how we might fit into that. I think that's more the approach now, and I think we have a subgroup, don't we, that's involved with trying to do the initial scouting of that sort of stuff. I think we're getting fairly far along, and we're looking to bring that along this year. So site development, and then beyond that, looking into some of the details of what would be entailed there and what we might expect for infrastructure and things like that. And along with that, site development and identifying sites. The other main thing right now, I think that's the focus, is workforce development initiatives, and we're focusing mainly here on our workforce and the need for skilled workforce. Our businesses are crying out to us that as they think of expanding, as they, CMI came here, as, they need to have a body of skilled workers, various types of skilled workers that they're having a hard time finding right now. And so that's not only our focus locally, that's kind of paralleled. You hear that on the state level and other things, and that's what it's all about. But we've already had some conversations with our local existing businesses and educators, education sources, to see what we can do to sharpen that focus. I think also part of it is just getting the younger people that are coming through school now educated into what industry work is really all about. It's not the old foundry, there's a lot of electronics in those buildings. Things have changed. Skill needs are changed. The atmosphere of the workplace has changed. I don't think they all know that. In fact, I've been told by people involved in education and in trying to develop this, they don't know that. They think in very old terms there, that those are not attractive places. So I think we've got a lot of areas there to work on to educate people and consider partnerships and try to work with that. And I think that will be another example of one of those things that ain't just recruiting people. It's setting yourself up and developing the infrastructure of education and communication that it takes to build that up. So those are a couple of the main things. And of course, the staff is always working on a number of things that they report back to you on, and I'll let Bill regale you with that at some other occasion. We would very much like to have a joint session with this group at some convenient time. We could, and I think that the development staff would like to talk with you a little bit to get some ideas of what you might be interested in. We've been talking to us, use of the TIF districts, this concept of workforce development. I think just getting us all on the same page. And I think a session once in a while is a good thing, and we hope that we'll be able to do that this year. Any questions? Did I put you to sleep, or is it just overwhelmed? No, we have a good commission. We enjoy it. Dan is our liaison. Hopefully he reports back to you, you know, that we're responsible and what we're doing. So thanks for your time.
I have a question,
Oh,
actually.
good.
You know, the Planning and Zoning Commission has been working for a while on some mixed use and, I forget, I probably don't have the terminology quite right, but, you know, where there would be areas in the city that aren't only residential, but a mixture of different types of residential and also businesses within them without going through the special provisional use process. And I don't know if that's, something you all are talking about on the commission as well, or whether there is any room for brainstorming and thinking about how those new types of neighborhoods and communities could potentially contribute to economic development? Just a question.
I don't think that's a topic we've expressly, knocked around recently. Bill, am I wrong? I mean,
No, we probably have an overlap like that.
but I think it makes a lot of sense. We've got some areas in town where, because of the flooding and other things, it seems like to me there's a circumstance there to consider what you're talking about. And along the peripheries, we've got areas that are housing, but they're not far separated from GMT or whatever. And, I think that's, and I've worked with a few of those circumstances of trying to get people in there to do a particular kind of business. And it can be awfully hard to know, to deal with the current categories of commercial, and the blended areas. And I think it's an area that we could make more inviting to, to that kind of mixed use. I think it can work out very well. And so bring it before us, Bill. We'll talk it over. Anything else?
Any other questions for Steve?
Steve, just a question about, you talked about difficulty in finding skilled workers for specific kinds of jobs in the city. And that, I know we've been talking about that for a while. Are you aware of any other communities in Iowa that have addressed this successfully, or is everybody struggling with the same thing? And how is Waverly addressing it? Are we coming up with anything besides saying for the long term we have to educate kids better?
You want to weigh in?
Sure. We've been working at a number of different things, and all across the state, I think communities are struggling with that, and the state of Iowa as a whole competes with others in the Midwest to try to attract that kind of talent. And, everybody has to kind of use what they have available in their own region, their own areas. What we found is we think there's an opportunity to home grow some of our own talent. And that's just basically getting Hawkeye Community College to offer more courses in the high school and in the community so that people can get a taste for what it is and what they may want to do with it. If you have a junior or a senior that wants to take courses like CNC and those kinds of things, they can really decide for themselves then, does that sound like something interesting for them to do when they graduate? So they don't have to go to a college that they don't really are interested in. They may go to a Hawkeye course and say, well, maybe I want to go on to be an engineer, but I've started with that initial desire to be in that kind of areas, those kind of areas. And Hawkeye's really been expanding their opportunities. Dr. Linda Allen and her team joined us for a kind of a forum here in town to discuss with our schools and others in the community. And they seem very interested in trying to expand their offerings out at their center out on the west side. They're probably underutilizing that space. The schools offered them use of more of their classroom space, the industrial classroom space, for offering classes within their school building. And I know the school has a lot of students that come from our surrounding communities and surrounding schools to take classes here in Waverly Shell Rock, where if Hawkeye can offer more, that just provides more opportunity. So we're exploring all those aspects. And on top of that, we've kind of talked about ways that that we can provide help to companies, luring people to come see us at least and try Waverly and see if they want to work here. So we've been trying the quality of life marketing campaign type of thing that we're exploring at this point, and we'll probably bring before this group at some point. We also have offered to help help them tour, help them sell the persons who come into the community on our community. Sometimes I think the people that come in looking for jobs maybe want to see and talk to other people other than the employers they're working with right away. So we've offered to do that, and we're going to see if it works out. We're going to try to do as much of that as possible, just to be really active in that recruitment side of it.
Yeah, we hear about it constantly, that with members of our own commission, Mark Hanelwalt out at United, Dorfer, the new CMI road building, and they're all kind of laughing about the fact that they're out there trying to hire, they're taking workers away from each other, and that's, and then beyond that, you have Olwine with that 350 employee, what was it?
Batteries,
right,
yeah.
Right, and they've exhausted their local. They've got to bring it in from somewhere, and it's just very hard. The pool of people that are here to do that is apparently deficient, and for whatever the reasons, we've got to unlock that, because that's certainly a key. If we're going to grow, we got to have a workforce, and so that's why it's on the agenda.
I think what we're finding based on other studies, other feedback, is that because there are jobs just about everywhere, people don't necessarily come to a community for the job. They come to the community for the other things that are there. So I think that's, as Steve certainly alluded to, economic development has changed over the years. 3-4 years ago, I think that commission stretched itself quite a bit to talk about residential housing. That just wasn't something we did in economic development before. That paid off. Now we're talking about how do we attract workers to the community. And again, a lot of that has to do with the amenities that the community has to offer. And as Bill has said, I think finding a way to market that in a regional effort, I think, is maybe a next step that we have to consider. And we have to sell them on Waverly, and then they'll come and look for the jobs here if they're sold on Waverly.
I did want to add one thing. I want to give a kudos to Connie, who's been participating in the Cedar Valley Regional Partnership, our 6-county marketing area. And we've expanded our job board several years ago, and with our new provider, and basically made something that was really envied by the others in the group. So we went ahead and had, Connie's been designing and launching a new website with the website people, and creating a regional job board, which now allows people to search all 6 counties instead of trying to go from one site to another site to another site. And we feel that that probably gives us benefits in that regard, because our jobs are posted then and all over the place, and people can search them. And even the people here can search for jobs in other areas, and it's close enough region that you can commute and not necessarily move away. But it allows our people to fill jobs. And we think that's been working fairly well, and people report back that they get good success off that website.
Just want to recognize that fellow Commissioner Paula Stevenson is here tonight to support the discussion. I don't know if you had anything to add, but appreciate her being here on our commission.
Steve, I think your comment about a joint meeting between the council and the Economic Development Commission, and maybe include planning and zoning to answer Edie's questions, is a valid point, and we need to take it up and figure out a time and a place and a way to do it, because it would benefit everyone, and
Good.
be some ideas to come out of it from all sides. So. I thank you very much for
Okay.
your report.
I'm just
and,
going to say honestly, I'm not going to be staying for the rules of procedure presentation Bill's going to be making, so don't be offended.
I thought you were an expert in that.
Yeah, I already know the subject.
You're going to be skipping the fun part.
Okay. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to the next order of business, the discussion of rules of procedure and ethical conduct code. And I think we're all really excited about it, but
You can certainly tell it, so.
no, it's an item that has been tossed around for the past 3 or 4 years that I know of, from seeing some dates on some other material, and this group has felt that it's very important, or an important part of the process. So James or Bill, who's going to lead the discussion? And
We'll start out by kind of going through what we've done here in a good way, not what we've done in a bad way, but we've done in a good way. We looked at the sample we had from League of Cities for the city of Nevada, and very well done, very clear, very concise. I know it's one that a lot of the council really enjoyed and thought it was a kind of a nice template to work off of. So Bill had gone through and kind of extensively changed out what was more for us versus them, et cetera. But a lot of the original template is still there. Again, very clear, very crisp. And there are sections that are, of course, provided by state code, and there are sections Carla had sent out an item earlier that we already have in some of our places of ordinance. And so some of the discussion has been, do we just eliminate the places that are duplicate, or do you treat this as kind of a small handbook to work off of in general, even with the parts that are duplicated, or at least cite them? And we're kind of looking at wanting to maybe use it as a small handbook so that this is all you need to understand. How do we operate? What do we look at? How do we function? What do you want to do as a council? And so, as we kind of went through, we tried to address the needs that we have as a city based on some of the feedback we've had. And, I guess we can open it up to any discussion points that council would like to have as it pertains to this. But overall, we're just wanting to get a good feel for kind of how it flows, if it's meeting the needs that we think are here. Are there areas we really need to improve? I know we have some areas we'd probably like to open up and discuss a little further, but we can certainly do that after, council's had some pointed discussions to kind of where they'd like to lead us as well. So that kind of takes us to how we've gotten here. And so I guess going forward, I'll leave it to council as to how do you want to enter into this discussion a little bit.
well, one of the things is that it is Iowa code requires that the council shall determine its own rules. And it goes on to say the following rules shall be in effect upon their adoption by the council until such time as they are amended or new rules adopted. And I know that was a point of discussion, if we adopt it for this council, what happens when the next one comes in? Well, I think it's clear that they would need to take a look at it if they want to amend it or start from scratch again or whatever. That will certainly be up to them. And
I guess that was a concern that I expressed when we talked about it last time was this meant to replace what's currently in the city code, or was we going to go through this and decide, yes, we want these to be our operational procedure rules, and then if they belonged in the code, we'd make sure they got back in there, because again, I think there are some things that should be in the city code because the effort, 3 readings, they can't just be changed on a whim type thing. I think they deserve to be in the city code, but then there are other things that are more day-to-day procedures that each council should have the ability to set. If we're looking at this as a handbook and we point back to the city code, I'm more comfortable with that, knowing that you're going to go back to the city code to change it, those type of things.
And I think it's what we were looking at when we did this was and maybe we need to better cite our ordinance, or this is a code section of, our own city ordinance or code. So you're well aware that it would take more action to change this versus just a paragraph to do that. And we can certainly make those indications within this, but that is, I can't think the intent we took it as is this is kind of a summary handbook as to what you have, whether it's code or not. And this is how we would operate going forward as a council, and staff would have something to follow as well. Because some of the items about, how things are put on the agenda and all these other topics that have come up in the past years that we really haven't addressed, that's what started this process to kind of center around. And then again, finding Nevada's policy was really helpful. It was very clear. And that's kind of how we took it. So that's my take on it, unless anyone else has some kind of input they'd like to add, that we see this as a summary of how we're going to function as a council going forward versus replacing a piece of the code and doing 3 readings every time we change it, et cetera. It was just a referencing of code and state code even, which is part of this as well, so.
In fact, I didn't change, I tried to I didn't actually put it down, and we probably should do that. But generally, I tried to incorporate what we had already. So I didn't try to change anything that was already in an ordinance. It was only really the rules that were unspecified that I maybe played with a little bit more and tried to make some changes to, just to conform to what I think most people had wanted to see happen in certain aspects, whether it be a consideration, reconsideration, those types of issues where we've had some questions come up in the past, postponements, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong, it's just how you set the rule. But then there's other things like participating by phone. It was in the code that way, so I left it that way. If you wanted to change it, we would have to change the code too, because that is what the code says right now.
I think, I like the idea that this is a document that each successive council from here on would be able to refer to and make changes as needed. And I think having that reference in there that this is code item, this is council preference, that then would indicate to the council, okay, if we want to change this, we have to go back in the code, or, no, this is up to us. If we decide we don't like this, we can toss this out just by vote. But having that actually in this, but then the discussion of, do we want to have the code language in here versus separating it out? I like this being a handbook, kind of include the code language where it is in there, where we duplicate it. The code is pretty clear. Maybe we even can go into the code a little bit and clean some of that up that maybe we don't have to have specifically in the code, because we do have a section that says in the code that our rulemaking procedure is up to the council to make those rules. So perhaps we have some of that where we can.
We don't have too much where it's really procedure. I think it's mostly the important things that you probably want to do in that ordinance process.
A lot of it actually seems to it duplicates the Iowa code, what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do as a council, so.
Mainly because we can't vary it from what the Iowa code requires, so it's.
They kind of pin us in on a few things.
And I know there are times when there's questions raised about things that are addressed by Iowa code and probably misinterpreted by certain people, and we wanted to make sure that you kind of see what the Iowa code is with regards to those things, the definition of conflict of interest, or the fact that somebody can assert a conflict of interest and, or claim a conflict of interest in a vote, and that has to be accepted. You have to accept when they say that they have a conflict of interest. The other way is if somebody has a conflict of interest and they don't think they do and somebody else does, I think we all have a process at least for having that discussion. I don't think we should all vote on if somebody does in fact have a conflict of interest, but I think you should be able to say, don't you have a conflict for a certain reason? And then at least have that discussion, because sometimes maybe the member thinks, well, maybe I do, and maybe I'll change my mind for that reason. So it wasn't intended to be call them out and try to vote them down as far as their voice, but at least having that discussion. And that's what I changed from the Nevada, because I think the Nevada allowed that to be a kind of a judgment made by other members. And I just felt like that wasn't what the Iowa law really provides, because it usually has to be a judge that makes that decision.
Well, it increases what I've gleaned out of it, or part of what I've gleaned out of it. It increases the transparency of the whole thing. And if there's, you mentioned the conflict of interest. If there's an appearance of conflict of interest, then there probably is, and it just needs to be dealt with. But
some of those things are aspirational too, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be, it's just reminding everybody that we're public figures and we say things in public, and it goes on TV and people watch it, and that, I think that those are good things to remember.
was reading through this, I really liked it. I liked a lot of what it set out, and I like the idea of having more of a handbook, having the rules in one spot and having the things annotated. I agree with the rest on that. I particularly like some of the aspirational parts where it was talking about ethics. I think that was very well done, and I want to commend you on that. I'm not going to wordsmith this at all. There are a couple of spots where it was still referring to Story County that maybe need to be changed. Was on actually the very last page, page 23, item number 8. And it's talking about the District Court of Story County. I don't think we want to take our business to the District Court of Story County.
They are in our district.
Friendlier over there.
I say they are in our judicial district, though.
Okay.
They're in two, so.
We'll change that.
The one thing that I would maybe like to suggest that I thought could have used a little shoring up is when we're talking about setting the agenda. And I know that with the last council, there are some issues on the agenda. I know one of the items we have every meeting is an approval of the agenda. And my question is, I know there are procedures for adding items to the agenda. But at the meeting, when we're having our council meeting, we approve the agenda. I mean, is that an appropriate place for someone to make a motion to enter an item on the agenda?
It is not, because you can't, you have to have it at least posted more than 24 hours
Okay,
before the meeting. So that's why we can't do anything else in a meeting. We can't say, oh, let's talk about this, it just
And
came up
that's
tonight.
Iowa code, right?
law.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be specified in here, that, and basically the vote we're taking on the agenda at the meetings is just that we're certifying that this is the agenda that had been sent out, rather than we're approving that this is the agenda that we want to talk about.
Well, we can remove.
You can remove items. Yes, you can remove items.
I think we had the mayor be able to reorder things for like people out of town or something that came on. But you can still you can do a motion to table, which is basically holding it and dealing with it later in the meeting. But I think the reorganization of it by the mayor maybe is a better way of doing those kinds of things when it's non-controversial, especially.
Well, and this is going to be a working document. I mean, this is a work in progress. So we have a good starting point. I think we've got a good feel for what this document is intended to do. And if we go into it and we decide that there's a part of it that's not working, that we can change by resolution, we can do that. Or if we decide that, what was originally proposed, we need to change a city ordinance, we can do that. But, this can be a working document, and I think it gives us a good start, good place, and I'm very comfortable with it. I think you've done a nice job.
On the idea of putting agenda items on, I think there was some discussion. When I did this, I was I put a deadline for Tuesday at noon, I think it was. And I think the intent was for the council to understand that if they have something that's not working through staff, and that we're not aware of, that we really have to have it that soon in order to get it placed on the agenda. Staff has kind of maybe even a more aggressive, we're supposed to do it earlier than that and get things together earlier. But we thought, at least with council items, that you should have it by that Tuesday so that we can work through. And then that's really kind of the last minute, because that's when we usually publish the agenda items and the materials on Tuesday. So that'd be kind of last minute, but it's just the idea that we have to give you some kind of idea that if you want something to be on for Monday, you can't give it to us on Friday afternoon. It just doesn't work that way. It just practically can't work that way. So, and we're more than happy to do it other times. It's just that we have to have plenty of time to do it, to organize and what the staff does.
It's not that it's not legal to do it that way. We certainly could do it. It's legal. It's just not very practical in order to get it out to the public on Agenda Manager and get it posted and meet all the other legal guidelines that we have to meet, is why that we need that extra time.
Right, and we had a couple that came in like on a Friday trying to get it on the agenda for Monday, which is well within the 24 hours of notice, but doesn't give council any time to really look it over and ask staff to do any back checking on it or.
And get it out to the,
In addition to getting
Public.
it out to the public,
Yeah.
I mean, it's, The public notification can simply be, it's on our website and we post it here at City
Right.
Hall. That's the extent that meets the law, but to truly be transparent and be open, it's getting it out there, giving it time for people to digest what's being put out, as opposed to just simply, oh, we just added something.
And, you know, the circumstances are always going to allow for exceptions. I mean, if you have emergency things that come up and, you know, on Thursday you have to do something, it certainly can be accommodated. We're talking about general rules, you know, not necessarily hard and fast if you have something that needs to be done.
Again, I know I kind of mentioned this last time, and I'm glad to see it in here. When you have a group of folks that are fairly rational about the way they approach things, this type of document usually doesn't come into play. In the past, we needed this document, plus we needed folks to understand what happened if folks still didn't choose to be rational about it. And I guess we need to be clear with the public, based on conversations I've had, questions I've got, it is extremely difficult to remove a council person. It's not just a group of people can decide they're not doing their job. They have their rights, you have to confront them with the issue, they are allowed a time to respond, and then it still can go into the court system if they so choose. So I just want to make sure we and the public know that this doesn't solve all our problems, it just gives us a good playbook to work from.
And in fact, that final section at the end is one that you have to adopt as rules for removing somebody, you know, actually the process that would be employed to allow for due process. Because the state law says you can do it, but you have to have your own rules. So people I've looked at some cases and I looked at how they did that, and the way Nevada had done it was pretty good, and so we try to recognize what has been the problem in other cases.
So I'm glad it's in there, and I hope we adopt something along that line so that everybody understands the mechanism as well as the importance of taking that action, I guess.
And I hope we never have to use it.
Yes.
Right.
I guess my question is there any step between or before removal? So we talk about, you know, it's up to the presiding officer to hear why people are not going to be at the meetings and to judge whether that's a adequate reason to not be at the meetings. And we talk about tardiness, we talk about not going to commissions. What happens if you don't? Is there any intermediate step?
It's really kind of like a job performance, I mean, in documenting things that you're not doing well. And I think it's really up to the mayor probably at that point, generally speaking, although I think other council members can probably take some action on that. I mean, just to talk to somebody or to explore things. But and it's really documenting those, because if you're talking about the removal, if you looked at the way the removal works, it's sort of like a hearing where you get to present all these reasons why somebody should be removed. And you might have to point out lots of things like whether it be posts, whether it be discussions or how outbursts or failure to vote, failure to attend. All those things would be collectively looked at, not one at a time. I mean, they're going to be, what's the whole body of the proof that you have with regards to somebody's participation? Because generally that's used, the removal is used when somebody just doesn't show up anymore. They just
So I
decide.
guess that's my question.
Anna, are you talking like a censure or?
No, I'm just talking about in a job performance eval, if you are insubordinate or something happens, you then meet with your supervisor and discuss it. So I don't see that in here. Is that something that we should put in writing?
Who would be your supervisor
Well, I
other
don't
than the
know. I
public?
mean, that's my question. Is
kind of
there
the-
any?
With regards to, the code actually provides, our code actually provides that if you miss 3 in a row, it's the mayor that's supposed to address why that's happening. And I think that's the investigative person that's supposed to address that.
So maybe we should insert that in here.
We can sure do that.
Is
and then just
my,
refer to it.
because
Yep.
there seems to be a gap. We talk about everything people are supposed to do. Well, if you don't, then what happens? Is there an intermediate intervention that can be done to try to redirect that person or discuss it with that person before you remove them from office? That's what I'm,
We could probably make that stronger at the end. I mean, we can set our own rules, so we can say that, and I think some of the rules have provided that you actually have a three-member commission do the first thing, and then you go to the full commission, or the full council, and, you know, I kind of, in this situation, I don't know if I put that in, left it in or not, but I think it's a,
At the end?
I really think it's maybe your idea is better, though, to have the mayor be the intervention person.
Well, I just feel like there should be some intermediate step before removal, to try to address it with the person and redirect, and that's what you would do on a job, is you give the person a chance to write you know, how are they going to change their behavior?
And certainly, that's what the code says right now as far as the mayor's on attendance. And I think the idea about the attendance was not that we judge a good or bad excuse. I think we just have to make sure it's communicated as to what that excuse is and not make judgments, because sometimes you can't really say the real reason if there's private things or personal things that you don't want to talk about.
I think your concern, Ann, is known as a session out behind the barn.
Right, exactly. I was going to say take them to the woodshed, but.
Well, either way.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that, but I do think it's also important to remember that, you know, this is different than a job, too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you're an elected official, and in the end, that's going to be your, you know, that's going to be your job evaluation if you choose to run again.
4 years is a long time.
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, I'm glad we have this built in, and I, too, like Dan, had more than a couple of citizens ask, you know, to say, please be sure, you know, there's something included for removing council members, in the hope that you never have to do that, but that there is some language that covers that. So I'm totally fine with what you're saying, Ann, too, to have an intermediate step in there. But I do also think it's different than a normal job.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard a lot of feedback. People want rules about decorum, you know, and this covers it. It's pretty basic and concise, but whether it's at the meeting or outside of the meeting, about, and it's aspirational, right? But what you should and should not say and how you should frame it, and trying to be mature and diplomatic is important.
So I guess going back to a few of the items that we talked about in a sense, and we have them listed here, there's a few we want to touch on in the first section, then we can go on to the others. But you know, we brought up the telephonic participation. In the past, there's been discussion that when someone calls in, should they be allowed to debate or not? Since they are not technically considered present, they are not counted as a quorum. And I guess it's 1.07 in here. I'm kind of curious, what is council's opinion on that? We have it left the same as it is in our code, so this would be a 3-reading change. But what is the feeling of council towards that as far as letting someone participate or not? I've seen cities do both, where you can even vote by phone. Some allow them to do that if you need a quorum. That's kind of the reasoning behind, and then some don't allow for anything other than to listen. So it is a wide range depending on how you'd like to proceed.
Well, ours doesn't say just listen. It says you can participate. I wouldn't want telephonic participation to be counted as quorum or to be able to vote. I'm not supportive of that.
Agree.
I could go either way on whether we allow it at all. I would say if we allow it, we should definitely get like a telecom system or something, because the way we're doing it now is not good enough technically to have it be dealt with properly, both from the participants' point of view as well as our hearing what they might have to say.
I think observing meetings where members called in and tried to then comment on things that were happening, as an observer, that was very disjointed. I doubt anybody over the television could hear what they were saying. And I think, my opinion is you're either here or you're not. And if people want to listen over the phone, fine. But I think it's very confusing to have people trying to chime in, and you don't know whether they heard the previous discussion and whether they're engaged in some other activity rather than giving their full attention to the meeting. I think it's confusing.
Well, the fact they're televised has been a point brought up as well. You can follow along as it's happening televised as well versus having to be on the phone. And so I've heard some of that communication also, that you wouldn't need to be on the phone to participate, as you can certainly watch same as everyone else is and still stay up to speed with what's happening. Because I think the delay was a problem at times, and it just depended on the situation, but you would get a interruption or you'd cut out. And so I agree. One is equipment that we need to have better if it's allowed. The other is, do you need it at all, since you can technically follow along.
It's
as you're going.
distracting.
It is distracting. When I have been gone, I have been able to log in on the YouTube or that to follow along. And I know there were a couple times where I was able to text with the mayor or with another council member to, if I had questions, kind of communicate that way, at least participate. My one thing with the participation that I would like to see maybe added or changed with it is that if they're going to participate by phone, if we're going to allow that it needs to be arranged in advance and it needs to be for the entire meeting. It shouldn't be for, hey, I want to be able to call in at 7:45 and talk about this one agenda item and just make a point on this one and then get off. If you're going to take the time to be a part of it, you're going to be a part of it. You know, if you're not able to be here, okay, that's understandable. There are reasons why people aren't able to be here at times, but it's not a pick and choose which you want to show up for type of a thing. And I know we had one situation that I was serving as the mayor pro tem for, running the meeting, and an hour into a discussion, we had a council member who wasn't here decide they wanted to call in at that point, and then got all infuriated that I wouldn't allow them to call in an hour in. And it's just, I think it should be arranged ahead of time, if you're going to do that you're going to do that, and you're going to participate the whole time.
Well, we have the opportunity to give written comments to Carla that can be read about for any topic. It seems that the need for telephone participation isn't really necessary. We could put those comments together, forward them, so they're going to be read at the meeting. We can follow along via YouTube. But I think that, if you're not going to be here, you don't get to vote and you don't get to debate. You can have your say via written comments beforehand, and that's all you need.
Well, and that's a different point of discussion too, because if you're providing comments to the council as a whole prior to a meeting, then it's not public, and that's not a quorum, or it can be a quorum, and that's maybe a violation of meetings law. We've not really read the comments in the past, because unless it's an actual public hearing, because it's not required to do so. We've had kind of a mix, and that's another point that was on my list. Do we allow comments to be entered into the meeting or not if you're not present? And that's, again, just dialogue with the council. Do you
That's
want
kind
to
of
see
along the
that?
line of, my biggest concern is, I took advantage of being able to call in when we were going through one of the hiring processes for city administrator, but I made it very clear, I'm only listening, just so I know what the group is doing, those type of things. For me to have somebody on the telephone, technology is certainly plays against this, but maybe only hear half the conversation, maybe not necessarily understand the conversation, but then try to voice their opinion or influence how we may vote, those type of things. I think that's going too far over the telephone. To me, it's an informational way to stay connected, but it kind of gets to, I would not support being able to send your written comments in and have them read into the record as if you were here to hopefully influence the vote. To me, if you're going to influence the vote, you need to be here and fully participate. It's very difficult. Unfortunately, my main work group is in Madison, Wisconsin, so I spend 80% of my time on the phone, and I know how dysfunctional it can be to try to conduct business in a virtual environment, especially when you get to some of the detail that we work on and things like that. So we would need a lot stronger technology for me to feel comfortable supporting participation through other than being here in person when you're trying to influence.
At the same time, I think it would be acceptable, and I know we have done this in the past, to have another council member read something, not necessarily a whole written statement, but at least express, this is what this council member has expressed, or relay that to the mayor to at least be able to, as the presiding officer, say, they're not able to be here, this is what they've expressed on this issue. And not go any really into great detail beyond that, but at least say that.
I don't know, I think that would be very difficult to manage. I think we either allow it or we don't, would be my take on it. I mean, if you start to say, well, it has to be short and it can only be these kinds of comments and, that's all up for interpretation.
I mean, what's to prevent a council member from giving another council member their rationale and that council member just reading it in then? You can't, I mean, you're not gonna sit there and say, well, are those really your words? I mean, are we gonna get into that type of a?
We can all talk to each other as long as we're not violating any public meeting laws. So, that's always there, whether you attend the meeting or not.
I guess that's kind of what I'm saying, is that that's there to say, hey,
Yep.
this is my opinion on it, if you want to bring it in.
Yeah, I have no problem with one or two person, no more than three, having a conversation. Here's my opinion, I won't be there tonight, I want to share it, and I've done that a couple of times on some issues. Again, to me, that's part of our role, is to have dialogue amongst ourselves, so that we understand where we're all coming from and that type of thing. But to openly try to influence the discussion from afar, I think is something we need to avoid.
Well, typically, any item that's up for discussion is not brand new. It's been discussed on the agenda before, maybe informally, that they've at least known about it, so they've had a chance outside of the council meetings to express their opinions on those things. So.
I guess I would have to disagree a little. Getting back to the telephonic participation in the meeting, obviously the whole reason you would do that is to voice your opinions during the meeting, because there are other avenues to listen in and find out what's being said. But I think that in situations where you have a legitimate reason for not being present at the meeting, and there is an item on the agenda that you feel is very important, that you monitor what is being discussed and be able to respond to that discussion, I think there is some legitimacy in being able to do that when you're not physically present at the meeting. Now, I think, to me, the biggest issue we have with that is the technology. Because right now, we really don't have, well, number one, the technology, and number two, the procedures to really be able to say how that is going to happen. And I think if we were going to allow that, we would need to make sure that we had the proper technology and that we knew what the procedures were in advance, and how you dialed in. Are you going to have to dial in during the entire meeting? How do you, make it known that you want to make a comment rather than just jumping in? So I can see some advantages to being able to participate in a discussion in certain situations. I certainly wouldn't have a problem with saying, well, no, you have to be here, present, physically present to be able to discuss. I wouldn't have a problem with that either, but I guess I'm not really ready to throw that whole thing out of the window at this point. I think that if we had the proper procedures, that it's something I think has some value.
So you're of the opinion, which is at that 1.07 council meeting, council members' telephonic participation is pretty well the way it's written here.
I think I would not have a problem leaving that in there as long as we had rules and procedures in advance of how that was going to happen.
Okay.
And if we had situations where it became a problem, we can always address it. It's in the city code, correct?
Yes.
So we could always address it by doing our 3 readings of the city code and taking it out if it became a problem. I feel that this is a tool that is available in unusual situations where you want to really be able to join the discussion, but for some reason you're not really going to be able to physically be at the
If they're
meeting.
unusual, I mean, it became, I mean, usual is too strong, but it became more than unusual in our last grouping of city council.
Which is why maybe we should really have some discussion about when that is appropriate. And it may not always be appropriate because it may end up becoming the routine of dialing it in rather than being in an unusual situation, so.
May I suggest that some of that is addressing that when we address the mayor and ask for permission to speak, the same thing on the phone, you can't see what's happening and you don't know. So you probably have to wait until the mayor addresses you and says, we've heard from everybody else, you're on the phone, do you have anything to say at this point in time? As opposed to having them jump in debates in the middle of it. And I think there's some value to that, and I think I remember it being when we were doing the hiring thing, they maybe have asked you if you had any questions or anything, rather than having you jump in and debate, and I think that probably works.
So it's procedural.
Procedural.
Something like that, if we can draft that up.
Right.
Well, I think to keep this moving along, that if you've got some strong thoughts about it, get in touch with Bill. And
It sounds like we have at least a couple of people who have strong thoughts about, I mean, Ann's,
Well, I just think it's a slippery slope. And I think that it comes down to what's an excused absence. And, just because we have technology to not be at the meeting and still participate, do we want to have it used that way? And so I think it's, if we had a system where, I just don't want it to be a distraction, because I think it was very distracting when people were just calling their best friend on the council and using their cell phone, and probably texting about the meeting. So I think I have also mixed feelings about use of cell phones during the meetings, because, is there business happening that's not publicly available, right? And so I think if you had a system like you do at a lot of board meetings, where you have a one number that you call into, you can signal if you want to speak, or you leave it up to the mayor to call on the person, and you can tell if the person is listening to the whole meeting. I just think there's so many things to police that I hate to have that become the focus of the meeting. And I agree that sometimes there are going to be issues that we cannot be here because of a work conflict or something. But I also agree with the mayor that a lot of things we've discussed multiple times. And so we often will have an opportunity to give an opinion about an issue before the vote.
And there are different types of topics, the weight, of different topics is different. And, the worst thing that could, I'm not sure where I am in this, but the worst thing that could happen in terms of what Ann's suggesting in terms of being here, that you have to be here, the worst thing that could happen is it's a weighty issue for you, and then you individually have to make a decision, okay, am I going to have to change this professional or personal thing in order to be here, because this is just more important?
So
Or not, and
I
you
mean, I'm
trust
sort
what
of going
happens when
back
you're
and
not
forth
here.
all over the
We
place,
have delayed
but
items on agendas because some people haven't can be here, or we weren't gonna have a full council, so we'll push some things back because we knew there were gonna be some absences. in
I would
advance.
rather see an absent council person make that request. Can we table this or delay it?
that's another option.
Yeah.
I would, and I would like, if we permitted telephonic participation, I would like to see that to be by far the exception rather than the rule. It would be very unusual circumstances, and maybe that's a judgment call that the mayor has to make or some other rule or procedure, but I don't want to throw it out entirely. I think it needs to be a tool that's available, but something that is used very, very sparingly and only in unusual situations. But I don't know who makes that judgment call.
Well, I don't know how we would enforce, you can only do this, very little. I mean, we kind of have to have rules, and that's what we're following.
My question then, when we're talking, because this one we're talking telephonic, which in some ways is actually old technology, even though we're talking that the technology isn't really great to get a good connection. But there's things like Google Hangouts or Facebook Messenger or things like that where you can have almost instantaneous back and forth. And I know I have received emails from constituents during the middle of council sessions in the past to ask a question or to check on something that, pops up. And I like having that ability to, whether I'm on my phone or whether I've got it pulled up on the screen, to be able to react or respond to that. But also, like I noted, I know I have done a couple times where I have been unable to be there. I can think specifically of a budget session one time where I had the flu and decided to stay home and not bring that into the council chamber, but I watched and communicated with Mayor Brunkhorst at the time via text message on questions that I had. As far as that possibility, capability to at least, stay engaged even if there is a circumstance where you're not. And it wasn't me calling in and talking, it was just me sending, hey, can you ask this, or can you, can you clarify this one for me? That was first or second, I think maybe the second year I was on council, and so some things were still not as real clear, and so I was clarifying some of that information, just going.
I think a lot of it's gonna depend on the situation, if it's.
In some of my seminars, they talk about the idea of council members communicating with each other through cell phones, and that's one of the things they have a concern about, because
Yeah.
then you're avoiding the public meeting aspect of having discussions, and you're having electronic discussions. So I think maybe we should put that aspirational thing in there that basically says you shouldn't communicate with other members.
Yeah,
Council members.
Yeah, council members, because you're supposed to be doing that.
we're not passing notes under the table.
Right,
But
right.
it's sort of what you're doing if you're using your
Right.
computer, or your computer, or
Yeah.
your
Cell phone or.
Dan.
Okay.
Well, do you want us to take another crack at that then and try and revamp? Because I do like the point we were talking about. If you are on the phone and you're calling in, I think it'd be appropriate for the mayor to then prompt any discussion from that individual at the appropriate time or as he sees fit in running the meeting, whether it be to start with or to end with or at some point in time. I think that alleviates a lot of the issue of trying to cut in or trying to watch with the delay or anything like that. It would be appropriate for that to happen.
Does that need to be something, because this is code language here?
Readings.
Or can that be, this code language is code, and then we add the procedures below it that are our own procedures that can be changed by future council?
I really think that the code can stay the way it is, because it's the mayor that runs the meeting and calls on people. And so, and especially if somebody's missing and just listening, they can say, I want to talk on subject 2, and then just call on me when I get a chance so I can say something. And that's one of those things I think would be pretty simple to write in here and say, the person on the phone should only speak when prompted by the mayor.
I would still say, though, another point should be something that someone brought up before, I think, Tim, maybe, that one does have to be there for the whole meeting and not just pick and choose, even though you may let the mayor know you want to weigh in on a particular item, but you should really be there for the whole meeting if you're
How are we
going.
gonna know that?
Well, they may not know, I mean.
Respond every once in a while, I don't know,
Are you
Yeah,
still
I think
there?
most
Are you
of
still there?
most absences are
You're
going to
snoring on
be,
the other end of the line.
you're gonna know in advance for most absences. And so then I think you're gonna be talking to the mayor anyhow about whether you're gonna be
That
absent.
prior-
And you could
prior
let him
arrangement.
know that you wanna weigh in on some issue so he knows to call on you.
And especially if you're weighing on one issue, you really wouldn't have to stay the whole rest. I mean, if you're on a conference, if you're somewhere
Yeah.
away,
Yeah.
you don't want to spend the whole time there, but maybe you can wait until that issue comes up, say your piece, and then get off. But it'd be nice to say, I'm getting off now.
Yes.
So you know they're not there.
That, again, could go back to the agenda item, talking about the mayor reordering the agenda. Well, let's put this one first so that
They can participate.
Yeah.
participate. And,
But that's the mayor's prerogative, I think.
yeah.
I think Bill's got a pretty good idea of direction that we'd like to go on this. And,
Okay, the other one we did a great deal of discussion in the past on, I think we will probably again right now, is, setting the agenda. In the past, it was talked about numerous times, it was gentleman's agreement, some days it wasn't, that any two council could put it was not my words,
Ladies and
Doctor, it was not my words. It was not my words. Providing historical fact, that any two council persons could put an agenda item on, but then sometimes it wasn't a procedure, so we didn't, and it just got to be kind of a mess. And that's where in the past I had dealt with staff and public, came through myself, and anything with council came through the mayor, out of necessity as much as not having a clear rule to follow. So I'm looking for that kind of feedback, because we don't have that procedure really in here of two council persons, that kind of thing happening. Is that something you want to see, or are you okay with any council person putting something on? I just wanted to have clarification myself, especially as we followed through going forward, what can and cannot be done, so we knew ahead of time what we should and shouldn't be doing.
It seems like, given that there's often supporting documents that need to be provided or some research by staff, that agenda items need to go through a common channel, and we can't just willy-nilly add things. And so whether it's, because do you two meet to talk about the agenda, the mayor and you, James, or?
Not right now, we have not had to, but we certainly could.
But I mean, you know, I think we either go through you and tell you what we'd like on there, or we tell you who writes
And we
the.
usually communicate through the clerk's
Yeah.
office to get that
Carla.
accommodated. but
Carla's
absolutely.
the end user, so to speak, of
There's the bottleneck right there when it happens. It feeds in and it goes right there. That's where it stops.
Actually, I'm okay taking direction from the mayor for council and from James for city staff. I mean,
I kind of like
whatever you
that
guys want.
arrangement simply
That's-
because.
Worked
That's how
well.
it's written
Worked
here.
really well for me, because I didn't have to
Yeah,
get
that we
involved
would
with
talk
some
to
of
the mayor about an
Right,
agenda item, and then
'cause-
he gets to say, no, it's not appropriate.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with
James
that.
should not be vetoing or
Yeah.
overruling somebody
So I
from
think that's
council.
fine.
I agree.
But staff, he does have oversight over, so yeah, you should have the authority on that.
That, I do actually have oversight. You know, I told,
I'm
nobody
only-
listens.
James, I'm only speaking as one of seven.
wanna see it in
so I
writing.
can't really direct that myself.
I
but
think
that's
how
just
it's
my
written
own
here is
perception.
fine, that we go through the mayor if we have an agenda item. Was there an issue, though, with the?
Well, we don't have it specified that way necessarily, and
I
I
think
almost
it
like
is.
to
It is,
specify it.
1.10.
Seems like it is.
1.10.
Yeah,
That's
Agenda
what I'm
items
reading
may,
through.
if the mayor believes an item submitted by a council member is inappropriate, so we must have to review them.
Right, but what if it's one from staff, or I'm just saying, is it specific that items from council members shall go to the mayor?
Yeah.
All others through me, I didn't know that I read that necessarily in
And
there.
that reading actually says
up a little
that
bit.
any council member can put something on by themselves if the mayor agrees with it. Versus
Yeah.
what we've talked about in the past, is having two council members
Right.
request.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, I personally am fine with the mayor, judging or making the discretionary call of any single council member suggesting an agenda item. I mean, again, I just try to think of a worst-case scenario. Let's say we had a really, really bad mayor who was agenda-driven for his own personal agenda and then would not put things on the agenda that we were requesting. I mean, we would still have recourse. Would we have recourse in a worst-case scenario situation with that spelled out that way, I guess is my question.
I think,
Say that.
and I think in a worst-case scenario, you could actually, at a meeting, ask and vote on putting an agenda item for the next.
For the
meeting.
next meeting, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, because under normal circumstances, which it will be most of the time, I'm guessing, I'm fine with any one of us asking and having the mayor be the arbiter, so to speak, of whether that's an appropriate agenda item or
As long as I'm not dealing with it, I'm great with that. That's
You could add a sentence that says city staff issues would go through you then.
right. I think we're gonna clear that just slightly, and we'll do that in the public as well, usually has been the case, but either way is fine.
Are you planning on taking out the language then about having the second council person?
No, I think that's a good thing for the mayor to have the ability to say to one council member, I'm not gonna do it for just you.
Can we simplify that
inappropriate.
even farther, that the mayor has the discretion to put any agenda item on brought to him by the council? If he feels it's not appropriate, that can be overridden by 3 council people asking for it to be on an agenda?
I think that's fine.
I like
3 a good
two.
number, you like 2?
The reason why I've liked two is because any item on the agenda can be brought for a vote with a motion and a second. So you always have to have a second to bring a vote. I mean, you can have, if we have a single person putting it on the agenda, they may be the only person motioning and it dies for lack of a second. But at least when you have a second person saying, let's put it on the agenda, now you've got at least 2 people that have said,
Should at least be
theoretically,
discussed.
you've got a chance to have it voted on. Versus a third, which now you're getting into really breaking.
And the only reason I offered the third was, I would hope we're all doing some homework before we ask something to go on the agenda to have a sense that it's commonly supported, at least for discussion amongst us, so that in Edie's case, we have a mayor that doesn't want to work with the council. 3 seems to be a little more burden on the council to override the mayor, is the only reason I'm suggesting 3 versus 2 is pretty simple to override the mayor. So it's just to make it, maybe,
Well, I think
Maybe it
three
depends on whether
three
you
is
want-
one vote short of passing. So I think that's a pretty high bar before we even get to start discussing it. I mean, you're almost on the level of violating your open meetings law, getting 3 people to say it has to come forth. So I really think 2 should be sufficient.
The other item, you mentioned citizens, and I guess this is the question. Do we want citizens to go through James, who's not directly elected and you're hopefully responsive to citizens, but you're not directly elected by them. You're responsive to us, and we're responsive directly to the citizens. Should those citizen requests come to the mayor?
That's fine with me. Again, either way. I've never had a problem depending on what it is, and we usually can confirm as to what's going on and why. So I don't have an issue either way with that.
Well, and we can have the same sort of thing where if the mayor says that's not appropriate, that person could then go to a council member and, we could then forward it on.
Versus James having to make that decision.
Correct.
And if James turns them down, now we get
makes
into a
sense.
whole.
Sounds good.
Well, I can't speak for other mayors or prior or after, but chances are, there's gonna be some discussion with, in this case, James or someone else before it happens anyway.
And that's the same thing, I'm not gonna throw something on without the mayor being aware of it at all, because that's not proper in my sense either.
You two still have to work
Yeah,
together.
we've gotta
on
work
that.
together on it, so.
Okay,
Okay.
then I think we can just crisp that up a little bit, and that should not be a problem then.
Okay.
I did not have anything else in the first chapter. I don't know if anybody had any other items that were really,
Yep, before we leave that, Carla has a question, I know, so.
Well, actually, just a couple of points. On the holidays, it's not where you put down for council meetings if they were on a holiday. That's not exactly how the code words it, so I would just make sure that both of them matched up.
Is this
The coun-
1108?
Our current code doesn't say that the council will set the meetings for to make up holidays. It actually lays out when the holidays are made up.
where's that at on this? What section was that?
Our city code-
It's in
city code
chapter 1,
10.8.
1.02, page 2.
Yeah.
102, so early.
On the rules, it's 1.02. In our city code, it's 10.8, and I was gonna bring that up also because our city code also brings up the fourth Monday meeting being study session only, no voting.
Right.
And that's not in this language, that's in the rules and procedures, so.
Someplace there is, though.
So, can I ask you,
This is the fourth
if you want to
meeting,
have
not
the
the
power
fourth
to
Monday.
do items on study sessions if you need to? Sometimes we have to do that because we might have to wait a week or.
Because
Well,
of, because
do
of,
we just take what's here in the code and plug it in at 1.02?
What does the code provide?
Code provides 10.8, the following rules and procedures shall govern the meetings of the city council. One, regular meetings, A, and so it has regular meetings, city council shall be held in council chambers or another public place on the first Monday, third Monday, and fourth Monday of the month commencing at 7 p.m. B, the meeting on the fourth Monday of the month shall be designated a council study session, except in the case of emergency or exceptional circumstances. The council will not at such meetings schedule and vote upon regular business. And then C, if the regular meeting day shall fall on a legal holiday recognized by the city, or if a quorum is not present, the regular meeting shall be adjourned to the succeeding Monday at 7 p.m. That's what's actually in the code versus the council shall determine whether such meeting shall be rescheduled or canceled.
Right.
I would just say, though, we should treat that seriously, and I know sometimes we've had to, but we should really only do it when we have to, because one of the things that I think does happen sometimes, when you are able to plan either a personal or a work-related absence, okay, you kind of do look for those, either where there's no meeting or where there's a study session, so, just because that's the least of all the evils, of not being able to be here, so.
Because there's no votes technically.
Yep, exactly.
So we may want to consider changing the city code to conform with what's in 1.02.
Well, I
kind of agree.
although, sometimes, as has happened, you're under a deadline to approve something or vote on something, and I think the out needs to be in there, that if due to time constraints,
My
proud.
point was just that we should take that exceptional language seriously if we keep that.
Yeah.
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what's more specifically in our code versus
Yeah.
this, which is
Shall.
shall, and then it'll
Shall be a
stop
study
the fourth
session.
meeting, we don't ever have a fourth
I probably
meeting.
didn't look at that close enough when I was trying to reconcile the
Yeah.
two, so I can clean that up.
Oh, okay.
Well, and yeah, that was, my point was just to make sure that both of them mirrored each other. I didn't
Okay.
have an opinion which way. But, and then also on 1.1 council meeting agenda, I just wanted to explain where I had written that this will not work on the timing. I understood this to be like all-inclusive, and really it's just for mayor and council, so it should be fine. I mean, I can't imagine there ever be a time that all 8 of you came to me on a Tuesday at noon and said, can I add this? So I think we'll be fine on that.
Sounds fun, let's try that.
Be nice. And on 1.12 on page 5, I'm not real sure, and I talked with Bill about it earlier, where it says, without the necessity of posting a new agenda and without formal mayor, council, or chairperson action. I believe that we have to follow open meetings laws. If it's not an emergency situation that we have to have a meeting within that, before that 24-hour period, I think that we still have to have the 24-hour publishing guidelines. So I'm fine if it would say rescheduled in the next 48 hours, not necessarily in the next business day.
Okay.
That's just a point that I think to meet the legal guidelines. And Bill had some other language too that would probably work as well.
Well, I took that directly from Nevada's, and I didn't really explore it. I mean, I think I jumped over that pretty much because I don't, but they did for a reason have in italics bona fide emergency. And I didn't know whether there was an exception that was allowing them to say, we can't do it tonight because there's 10 inches of snow, but we're going to do it tomorrow night because we have to get this done. And maybe there's an exception to say, we're just moving it to tomorrow night instead of today because of this emergency. I don't know if there is or not. So if there's not, we can just
Right, like
reschedule
you
it.
said, usually in that situation, you're going to know ahead of the meeting even, you can cancel it ahead of time and get it
Reschedule it.
postponed within enough 24 hours. But
Do you have to post the agenda again if you don't change the agenda?
I do. I do. It's in Iowa Code Section 121.4, paragraph 3, I think.
Oh,
or
that
C.
one, yeah. It's been a thorn forever with me at paragraph 3.
Okay.
We're going to have a talk tomorrow.
We were going to work on that one, I think.
Okay?
Tim
Yes.
said I have authority now, so it's good.
I'm only one of 7.
I'll take it right now, Tim.
Okay, that's all I
Anything else,
had on
Carla?
chapter 1,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Chapter 2, the first
Actually, one
one,
thing from chapter 1, yeah. So 114, section C, and I know what you're trying to say here, but it seems really awkward to me. The section where it says individual council members should refrain from listening to staff and employee comments. I know we want people to use the, proper chain of command and all, but there's just something that I think the city council member should have the job of listening to city and staff at all times. And our response should usually be that they should go through proper channels, and you don't want us trying to, pester staff and getting involved in staff decisions. But I don't know, there's just something about that phrasing that rubs me the wrong way.
Wasn't there a section in one of the other documents that stated it like that?
Well, I think I just did this. I didn't create this one. I think this was
I know,
already
but wasn't there I don't remember if it was, and I don't know where this paragraph came from, but I can't remember if it was Nevada or wherever, but it said that you can listen to staff, but you are to redirect them to
Well,
the
that-
city administrator or
Well,
to their
that's the
supervisor.
last sentence here, says the whistleblower should normally be referred to the city administrator.
Yeah, but there was some other, in one of the other ones that we
Right.
reviewed when we met with you, and I gave you my copies, so I don't know
Yeah,
what they are, but
it's-
I thought it was
it's in the
worded.
Nevada one, that there's actually 5 sections, or 5
Yeah.
paragraphs.
Yeah.
6 paragraphs, 5 sections, and it looks like Bill tried to boil it into 3.
I thought that was really helpful, though, because I think especially as a new person on the council, it really, I saw it more like an educational tool of what to use and how to frame your conversations with people. When to be responsive and to listen but not overstep your bounds and not get involved in personnel issues, quote unquote. So
That's
I
a
found
pretty
that.
difficult thing to put down on paper for y'all, because.
But I thought the
what
more
happens is-
lengthy,
yeah.
the more lengthy one I found really helpful, even though it was 5 sections instead of 3, but. Yeah, listening but not promising things and knowing what your responsibility is.
Okay,
I thought that was helpful.
I'll get your notes.
Seems like there ought to be a better word than whistleblower too, but.
Yeah.
Again, I
Yeah, that seems
There are
pretty
laws that are-
drastic,
there-
doesn't it?
There actually is whistleblower law protections that are written into
Yeah.
Iowa code and federal code, I believe,
Okay.
so I think it's actually titled that.
But I don't know, that seems pretty drastic for what people are usually trying to do.
I just had a question, comment on 1.03. As we're stretching this out a little bit, but that's.
It's all right.
I just wondered if, and we've had discussion about our video recordings, if that should in some way be noted as part of our agendas and minutes that we have to keep by Iowa code the minutes, but I wonder if in our council rules and procedures, we couldn't have a note in there that we are, when possible, videotape recording and keeping them record that way.
And here's the thing, is I don't ever have a hard copy of the video. It's always on YouTube.
Yeah, but we
Okay,
have a
okay, I
copy
just
on it in
wanted
the
to
cloud.
be sure that you knew it wasn't like in a library.
Right, but you could direct them. And again, that's why I say, the minutes are required by Iowa code. You have to do
Yes.
that. And the recordings that you take, or that are done when we do have our closed sessions, those have to be kept by Iowa code. But we've also discussed, when practicable, and I'm not one to say we have to always have every meeting tape recorded and videotaped. But, when we're in here, just note that we've got that availability and would try to make that available for the public.
I think we can add a section D that says that's, without requiring it if something breaks down or something messes up.
Right.
We have those
When
kind of things
practicable,
that happen.
when.
Yeah. Every reasonable effort.
So I guess I have a question about, what is it? 1.04, section D, providing officer maintaining decorum. So does the code, city code, talk about the procedure for removing somebody from council chambers? If they don't, I know Chief Purcell's here, he's our guy. But do you have to say that, or is that just up to the mayor that he can have anybody removed who's not behaving?
At the conferences, they talk about this kind of problem. They indicate that at some point, the mayor should just take on their responsibility to remove somebody from the chambers. And usually, there's enough evidence there that nobody's going to do that very lightly, so it's going to happen when it really needs to be done.
Okay.
And
And that could include a council member.
it can, public members or council members.
I think that's happened
Staff.
at Waterloo council meetings recently.
I just watched one that was, I'm glad we're not in the news.
And I think that there's times when they've recommended that the mayor just adjourn the meeting. If you
Sure.
can't get order, you just adjourn
Sure,
the meeting.
that's true. Or give some sort of secret signal to the police chief.
Already got that.
Spring into action.
There's a
Already got
white
that.
button over here they told me never to touch.
Have that though? We have a panic button. Is that a panic button?
It is.
That's good.
We just
Okay.
didn't want to tell you it wasn't hooked up, that's all. That's-
Well, I know you guys are trying to get out of chapter 1 here, but
Oh, no, it's a good
I
chapter.
just, if you go back to 1.02, the third sentence is troublesome to me. The fourth meeting shall be a study session. I think what you really mean is
Fourth Monday.
the meeting on the fourth Monday.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Oh,
That's really not clear.
that was probably.
And that sentence is going to change anyway, right?
Take that part out.
We're gonna have a proofreading session when it's just before final publication,
Nobody
so.
pointed
Well,
this
we've got
out to
an
me
editor over
earlier.
Well, yeah, speaking of proofreading, it is true. I saw a couple of places where there were verbs missing, so,
Like that.
yeah.
That sometimes happens when I'm redrafting and moving
Yeah.
things, and I don't get it back in.
Yeah.
Okay. James, let's move on.
First chapter, we're good. Okay.
Yes.
Second chapter, I assume everybody likes where they're sitting. So 2.01, that's done. Good deal. Conflict of interest. I didn't have a whole lot of items in here that have really generated a lot of controversy that we've brought up in a sense. I know order of business, we've kind of walked through as well, but this one is kind of really although there was one, I guess. Consent agenda is oftentimes brought up as to how much do you and do you not include in consent agenda? What do you technically have? Can you add more? I've seen meetings where it's like 7 items, but there's 62 things on it, and they just moved 20 at a time, and it was all consent. I don't know if we want to do that, but there are cities that do that, and they're very short meetings, but there's a lot covered without a lot of paperwork. So as far as consent agenda, is there anything that we are not putting on that you think we should, or is there anything that we have on that you don't want to be on there? I mean, I know it's kind of a broad one because we still have some
I know in-
newness that we haven't seen, but it really has become quite a topic in the industry a little bit, is what do you do and not do to
The only thing
pass?
that I might say, and I mean, the council can shoot me down, might be some of those first readings and setting a public hearing. Whether they go on the consent agenda of paying bills or have a second section of the consent agenda for establishing public hearings. I don't know what the code says.
Ordinances have to have roll call votes.
We have to have roll call votes on each one individually. Okay.
And I guess I would say, I mean, even though I think most of the time, most of us are in favor of getting a public hearing set up there, there might be issues someday where somebody just thinks it's important to, from the beginning, say, there's no way I can support this, and here's why.
The other side of that is that when you start debating at the setting of the public hearing, we're not always prepared for that, and we don't have the materials to you to show that, and we really don't want to get into the real meat of it, and we've had to get into the meat of it when we're just setting the public hearing. And it's not the first reading. When it's the first reading, it's still a first reading. So I'm not talking about those situations. It's when you're just purely setting a public hearing on something. It's not, because the first reading is still a first reading. I agree with that.
Well, and some of that might just be educating us, newbies especially, like what is the purpose of a first reading versus what is the purpose of, setting the public hearing and.
Sometimes statutorily, we just have to say, if we're going to sell something, we have to set the public hearing. And it's not really a reading, it's just we're setting the public hearing, and that's when the debate occurs. So we'll try to differentiate those and maybe explain that.
I think in general, you have done a good job of identifying consent agenda items. I mean, to me, they're typically things that are routine, matter of course, payments we have to make, where they're really nothing controversial typically, that you'd want to debate, just business that has to get done. And, and we do have I think we still have the opportunity to pull something out if we do want to discuss it. And so and am I thinking about this right? The consent agenda, there is no discussion, correct? That's part of what it is. You move the consent agenda, you second it, and you vote. There's no
Question
discussion.
what things may be, in a sense, I guess, on it,
There's
but,
clarification.
yes, thank you. That's
Okay,
the term I was
okay.
looking for. Versus pulling out an item separately to discuss.
Yeah.
You can clarify anything on there. If it's not, we look at the background information, you click on it.
Like, I know we have a couple
Absolutely.
of times where things got pulled more for clarification, so you could do that.
I think you could do it either way. I really do. If you wanted a separate vote for a certain reason or clarification, if you still didn't get it, you could have it removed.
But the pulling has to be done before there's a motion
Yes.
for the consent agenda.
Yes.
Well, technically, you could amend the motion is what you're doing. Pull it.
Okay.
Because the only other item that we've talked about in the past, and it's budgetary in a sense, but we've looked at it, is if we have items that council's approved for budget, we've went out and purchased, they were under budget, do we need to bring it back again to be approved again by council for a second time? That's the other item that's kind of come up, or do you put that on a consent agenda as long as one is budgeted, was under budget? Obviously, items that were over or weren't, you would want to discuss and have that impact with council to have that discussion, but that's been brought up a little bit, and I've seen some other cities kind of doing some of that, because I've had that discussion with them. How do you handle that?
At all cost levels?
Varies. So some
Yeah.
cities have a threshold
Yeah.
of 25,000 or
Right.
10,000, or it just depends on the comfort level, depending on size of staff, et cetera, and how much do you trust us? And, but it's still on their consent. You see what we're doing. It's not as if it's hidden that you don't see it. It's just not a separate item to be discussed and voted on and brought out in the paperwork, et cetera. It's more of a consent just in that sense, and you can always pull it out. But it's just one less thing that we looked at it. We've already approved it once. We bought what we said we were going to buy. It was within budget, I can speak. The backup documentation's there to look at. Is that something you'd want to allow to go into consent agenda? Obviously, knowing it can be pulled and
You
there's
can always pull
paperwork
it.
and, okay.
To celebrate.
We may
the
try that
process.
going forward, and if it becomes an issue to where we're pulling them all the time, we'll stop doing it. But otherwise, if it works, we'll just try to put those on as well.
Is that for purchases and projects, or just purchases?
Purchases. I would only do purchases,
Yeah.
because project work is
Yeah.
always good to keep updates on that. I want to have that as we go through some of those. And I guess some of that may depend on what kind of project it is, but we'll try and use judgment to have it out there. And if it becomes an issue again, we'll go back to pulling them separate, but we'd at least like to attempt it to try and alleviate some of the size of the agenda at times.
Well, especially if we can ask a clarification question.
Absolutely.
Before we vote.
Absolutely.
That handbook from the Iowa League of Cities addresses consent agendas also, and is a pretty good reference to what, so.
And I go back to our last 2 weeks ago agenda. We had set a public hearing for the budget, set a public hearing for the bituminous seal coat program, set a public hearing for the slurry seal program. To me, those all could have been handled in a consent, because it's not the first reading of 3, it's just setting a public.
Setting a
hearing.
date to have it.
I mean,
Maybe we'll
Maybe
check
we
and
can
see if that's
package
something
like
others are
things like
commonly
that.
doing, and
Yeah, I would say if it's just a simple, set the public hearing, and it's not an ordinance or a resolution. Yeah, an ordinance, a resolution wouldn't be on there. but-
again, I think, yeah, I would be in favor of combining like things and trying to get it done as groups versus individually.
we'll make an attempt at it and kind of use our best judgment and see how it goes. And again, if it becomes an issue, we'll pull back and go back to where we are now. We just want to try and not necessarily speed up the meetings by any means, but just provide a little more of a consistent approach to it. Some things are and some things are not. They all seem similar. Okay, I didn't really have anything else that has been discussed at great length on the second chapter, unless there's items that council itself would like to bring up and hit individually.
Got a couple, 2.08, kind of goes down in B, it says comments or current agenda items. It's just kind of a general question. I think we've taken different approaches under different mayors. What is the legal, what has to be read and what has to be read by whom, I guess, when it comes to a resolution, those type of things?
So what our objective here is, and goal is to make the public aware of what it is council is voting on. So if the mayor has completely read the motion and then you go right into a vote, I would say it's fine to say, so moved. Is this kind of what you're meaning, Dan? Okay. Now, Bill, of course, is the legal opinion, but also if the mayor has announced the agenda item, and then there's several minutes of conversation or discussion between council and public, you might want to just go ahead and read that so that it's kind of renewed, so that the public knows, hey, we are doing this. And then the only other thing that I would add is if there's, so in the titles, we don't necessarily put like the cost of something or the date, time, and place of the public hearing. Those are the type of things that would probably also need to be reread. But as far as law goes, I'll let Bill talk on that.
Well, I think what I would suggest is that we probably put more than we need to in the title that's being read, because it's really the motion that, or, you know, so if we can maybe just more simplify that for the mayor to some extent, so that he doesn't have to read it all, because it's going to get read when somebody makes the motion. Or the,
I'm more than comfortable having the mayor read the whole thing, including the date, the time, and just saying, yes, I motion that. But, yeah, the redundancy sometimes of the context, it gets read twice.
Like we did the TIF district and it was like 9 paragraphs. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a lot.
so I think we really need to decide if it's going to be the mayor reading it,
I think
let him read
Mayor
it, then you can say
Brunkhorst-
so moved. Yeah.
Mayor Brunkhorst took the approach that he would just summarize it in less than a sentence sometimes, and then one of us would have to actually read the whole thing. I think Chuck kind of sometimes read the whole thing, and then we would say, yes, I'm just motioning what he just said. So, yeah, it's whatever's easiest, and
I think as long as it's communicated in your motion, if you refer to what they said, it's communicated. If you say it, it's communicated.
So if
It's
the
really
mayor
how
read-
clearly it's
So if
communicated.
the mayor reads the whole thing, we're within our latitude just to say, I move that.
As long as it included the important things that had to be said too, because if you had to have the dollar value or those things have to be in the motion, so we either put it all in both, the title and, or the important things that need to be read. Because sometimes I think, I think Carla's, she's jumped in and said, I think you should read the whole thing because there were certain things that weren't in the title.
So it comes down to what the mayor wants to read and doesn't want to read. If he doesn't want to read it, you're going to read it.
Well,
Kinda that whole-
And that's fine.
the bottom line is that it's to inform the public.
Sure.
And so that they know what's out there. Again, it's the transparency angle that,
I think sometimes the motion itself isn't that informative. I think it would be helpful, Mr. Mayor, if you could do kind of just a brief summary of what the topic is, maybe rather than reading the entire
Well, that's-
motion. And then, rely on us to actually do the heavy lifting of
And
reading the
occasionally you've
motion.
done like that, like describing,
Yeah.
when we were doing that rezoning
Yeah.
of, by Mark's property, I think
Right.
you said, this is the corner, you know.
No. I'm comfortable with that. We'll try it, see what happens, and see what Carla prints that I have in front of me.
Then in the section B again, it says comments on current agenda items. After an item has been moved and seconded, but prior to council discussion, the mayor may recognize citizens. I guess sometimes having citizens speak before we've had a chance can really change the tone of the meeting as well as what we discuss and how we discuss it. So I certainly want the public to be able to weigh in. I just don't know that I would restrict it or set the expectation that's prior to us having the opportunity to discuss it.
It says may.
I want to say that's been our procedure, is that we've allowed people to speak prior to the motions and stuff, and then we go to a motion. That's kind of been what we've done. But I agree with you, sometimes it can be, different, and it's, the other thing I have on this is that it almost then reads that once the council's discussed, we don't hear from the public again, and there are certainly times where the public has additional information they can provide us once we've started our debates, so.
Can we
It
leave
also
that to
gives
the
the
discretion of the mayor then, as
I
far
think
as whether
so.
it's before, after? or
This
during?
does, yeah, it says he can decide when and if they get to
Right.
speak.
And I know
and
that's
how
been
they-
done before, is that the chair or the mayor
Your
is.
kind of call on the topic and
Yeah,
how it's
and,
playing out.
I think what's not helpful, though, is when we don't have a chance as a council to speak without interruption. I mean, you want to hear what the citizens are saying, that's for sure. But when it has happened, I've found it distracting and a little bit frustrating when we're going back and forth between council deliberating about something and trying to engage in some kind of dialogue with a citizen.
Yeah, I think Edie, I agree with that. Generally, it seems like it makes sense to let the public speak and then council, simply because council is elected and probably should have the last word on it, although there's no point in being inflexible about that.
And my last comment in this section is 2.16, citizen complaints, grievances, recommendation. Just wondering what the feeling is if we say citizens and employees complaints, grievances. Again, I think with some of the things we're doing, to call out that employees have another avenue to bring an issue to us if they haven't been able to have it resolved in another manner.
And I've got that in the handbook. We have a full section on that. in
I
written.
think they're a citizen too, though. I mean, I think in terms of,
Yeah, but
Allowing them.
do we want them bringing an employee grievance directly to the public council meeting, or should that be brought?
I'm hoping that everything would get resolved through the employee manual process, but I guess I want to give them permission if all else fails. They can bring it here.
That's in there. That's the last step, is it will come to full council.
Yeah.
So I'll have that to you again this week, but that is, you can see it is a multiple step all the way up to here in front of full council, if it takes that.
In that other
Yes.
section, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's
That's
probably
why I
better
like that. It
handled
just
not
was very
maybe
step
in
by step.
public, but
Yeah,
give them the avenue of bringing issues directly to the council.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure how formal you want to make that, but when I very first started here, there used to be a complaint form that people would fill out and then submit to either James or council. I don't know if that's something you want to explore or just say that would be uncomfortable. I think it would be uncomfortable. I'm just throwing it out there.
No, I don't see any reason for a form. In fact, one of the publications that I read says, even the public, if they want to address the council in open forum, they fill out they form prior and hand it in and all of that.
That was
I
this one,
said that
actually.
before.
Yeah. Yep,
Check that out.
yep, so, okay.
Okay. Any other questions from council in the second section? It was a big one. It's a lot in here, but a lot of it was pretty straightforward, too.
I just want number 7 in consent agendas to, or excuse me, in the order of business. I want number 7 to be before number 6.
Where, which section are you
yeah.
in?
Remember you briefed
2.06.
106.
public comments prior to the consent agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. I might have just done that without checking and doing from memory.
Okay,
I had a question about the section on filling council vacancies, which I've lost. Oh, there it is, 2.17. And I think we might have talked about this when we met. Should we say what the procedure is outlined in the code? In there? The Code of Iowa?
This is the code.
Well, I mean, you have to vote on whether you're going to appoint by majority, right?
Well, I just wasn't
If you
sure. It says
appoint
the
somebody-
council will follow the procedures outlined in the Code of Iowa. And then it says if it pursues the appointment process. Is this what the
We-
Iowa code says,
No,
the
it
rest of the
doesn't.
paragraph?
We just created, this is a created appointment process. You can just vote at a meeting to replace somebody with somebody. You don't have to do the process.
Okay, so I guess my question is, what is the procedure outlined in the Code of Iowa?
It says you can appoint, and if you don't appoint, you can hold special election.
And should you put that in there? That's my, because it's,
Because
I think that's confusing how
people can
that's.
petition for a special election, and there's a procedure for petitioning for a special election. And then there's, if they can overrule your wanting to appoint somebody.
I think as long as we have reference to the
Okay,
Iowa code.
the section or something, yeah.
So that we
Because
don't.
maybe if you could
Specific
put
about
the
which section.
section, so that if I
We
wanted to
should
find
cite it,
out
at
what's
least
the
cite it.
procedure, I can look it up.
Yep. I'll do
We'll
that.
have it at least cited
So
there,
we
what
don't
that
make,
code is.
so we
Yeah,
don't
it
make
doesn't need to be
this,
humongous section, but just so we know where to look it up.
so we don't make this document overly cumbersome.
Right,
That's the,
I was mostly trying to fill in something that didn't exist, so that maybe there was a procedure for actually people feeling that you did a fair job of asking for volunteers, type of thing. And actually, it was what they had in theirs before. I think I didn't make too many changes.
okay. Moving on, any,
Yes, sir, we certainly can. Anything else in second section? Because the third section, really, a lot of this did get into Iowa code where they're talking about freedom of information, open meetings, that kind of thing. We've kind of talked a little bit about discharge and removal, wanting a little more in that. So I didn't have anything additional on this section for chapter 3, unless council has anything they'd like to discuss individually.
I think it's good that they put something in there about electronic communication in the open meetings.
The only comment that I had here was in section 3.07 on page 21. Here again, I really said I didn't want to wordsmith this, but I wonder if that should say removal considerations and procedures.
Because it does say removal procedure, so that would make sense to have that.
The thing that they said is that you have to adopt that, an ordinance for
Word
that.
for word.
So what we'd have to actually do is, E, I put in there this way, but we'd actually have to do a separate ordinance and adopt it a separate way, because you don't have to adopt these rules by 3 readings. And so that procedure would have to be a separate procedure.
I'm just talking about the heading
Right.
of the section.
But I'm presuming I would take the removal procedures out of this section and then just do that as a separate ordinance, and then it would no longer have those. I added E just to have it in there, that if you actually did this, you'd have to separately also approve this in a separate place. So you could do the same thing, and I could put in procedures because you have adopted it in a different place in the code. So that makes sense if I do it that way.
And I'm assuming that these removal procedures that are in section E have not been adopted.
Correct.
By the.
Right,
Yeah,
they have not been.
We would have to do that as
Right.
part of an ordinance.
We'd have to, once you did the rules, what we do is just put that in an ordinance and come back with the readings. You could do the first reading with the same time you approve the rules, and then do 2 more readings on the procedures.
Got it. I like the removal procedures, by the way. I think they're very good, very clear, fair.
The only, I still have a little bit of it's the teacher in me, the whole idea of this unexcused absence. How do we determine whether it's excused or unexcused? Because, at school, if the parent calls it in, it's excused.
The mayor has to decide.
So
Yeah, so do we have to
actually,
have
I think,
our parents call us in to,
actually, what I think is unexcused is generally not giving any excuse or not explanation.
unexplained absence?
If somebody saw you at the casino when you said you were homesick with your mother, it really is the facts outside of what maybe is given to the mayor.
But I think the point you made earlier, though, about can we divulge what is or isn't, I think unexplained is maybe a better term.
I
I do
think
like that
unexplained
versus
rather than
unexcused.
unexcused, because,
Unexplained.
I decided to take a family vacation. Well, I'm sorry, that's not a good excuse. As a teacher, I can sometimes say, there was a test due that day, you suddenly take off, okay.
Unexplained is a better word, because I took this out of
Yeah.
the earlier where they allowed the mayor to decide what was unexcused.
Yeah,
And I took that really out of it, so.
I don't know, I have mixed feelings about that because, an explained absence can be multiple and sometimes, can be multiple absences due to, and let's just take a really maybe more difficult situation, attending your children's events at school.
Yeah.
But they happen all the time.
I mean,
Because,
I'll throw this out at you too. If somebody is sick enough that they can't attend for 3 months in a row or 4 months in a row, at what point should they resign? I mean, and so you may have to use that to force somebody who doesn't realize that they really should step down. Even if a simple illness isn't going to do it, but if you're ill to the point where you can't participate. I don't know. That was their language, unexcused, because I really did take excused.
I like unexcused better than unexplained, because you can explain anything. I mean, well, really,
And I think it was a lot of it is just who makes the determination.
Yeah,
That's all it was.
Just where the unexcused jumps out at me, it was just kind of like,
well, somebody has to be able to discern that and make the call on that. I mean, and I guess that's the question.
And frankly, I thought the 4 was pretty small.
And it doesn't have to have any judgment,
Well,
you're
that's
either here
in
or
the
you're not.
The section about unexcused,
I thought 4 was a small number in 12 months, by the way, or, that's, a lot of us have those kinds of things that happen, and we might miss 4 in a year. That's really not a concern, probably,
I think we
with
have
the number
about
of meetings we
36
have.
regular meetings per year.
but that's unexcused absences.
The
Yeah,
budget meetings are included.
A lot of it's subjective.
Okay,
It's going to be
yeah.
up to the presiding officer, I guess, to determine.
And it's going to be up to the judge who's doing the removal,
Yeah.
if you're
And
doing a
it's
court
about a
case.
pattern and a
or-
context,
right.
and are there other behaviors happening?
Well, and some of it would depend on whether that may be 4 absences consecutive, or whether they're spread over a period of several months. So,
And
again, it's going to be a judgment call. And,
I think the word unexcused should remain. I think that is more appropriate. You can explain anything. And you can have a reason for having an absence, and maybe you're on vacation. But if you're on vacation every single Monday night, that then does not become an excused absence. So, there are a lot of considerations that go into that, and it's really a facts and circumstances case.
in other words, a 90-day trip to Alaska or something is going to be out of the question.
Get it pre-authorized.
Get it pre-authorized.
I don't know who authorizes the mayor's absences, that's the other.
You can phone it in.
Okay,
Maybe.
I got to come clean here. I know that May 2019, I'm leading a trip to Germany. I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks, so I'm getting my excuse in now.
Pick them wisely. Make sure you get that bye week in there. Pick them wisely.
I take it 10 days to New Orleans is not a problem?
That's not a problem.
You're on the naughty list.
Huh, as long as
You got 3 more, Mike.
as long as you bring me back a bag of crawfish, you're fine. So.
You should have spoken sooner.
The last thing that was on my list, and I thought about skipping it, but enough people have kind of quizzed me over this. Currently, and again, the salary, the stipend that we get is so small, I don't know that it would make anybody act differently, but should we get the stipend for meetings that we don't attend?
We leave it up to you. I know it was brought up in the past as well. Is that a change you can make, and how do you do that? But yeah, that's been discussed many times. Straight salary, or are you paid so much per meeting?
If there's 36 meetings, you divide that by 2,000, that's what you get for attending a meeting. If you don't, you just get that drop. Again, to me, the bookkeeping
Yeah,
is
exactly.
probably a hassle. It's not enough to probably force people to have better attendance. but-
When I first
Well,
started, it
and-
was $15 per meeting for each council person.
I think you can't
Also for
set your
doing the
pay either. I
review.
think you have to wait and set it for the next council.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, you could do it when, before the
Again, I'm
next
not
election.
saying let's increase it, it's just how do we disperse it?
Oh.
Is it your payment for attending the meeting, or your payment for doing all the background reading and?
Unless you got
Just a
exactly.
whole
Shebang.
stipend for the whole thing.
All things.
Payment for public service. is
Yeah.
what it
That's
amounts
the way I look at it,
Yeah.
but again, when you see repetitive absenteeism,
I know it's particular. It still may be, we'll have to look into that and double check it for sure. A lot of times they don't let you do it for yourself, but you have to make that change for the next council. And we'll dig into that and see if
again,
that's a
I
possibility.
don't personally feel it's important enough
Yeah,
that
I don't
Iowa
either.
code, we'll look into that.
I'm obligated to bring it forward, I guess.
Well, I
Let us
think
check on
there's-
that with Iowa code, see what it specifically says, and if it's something you can deliberate on, we'll bring it back, and if it says, hey, can't do it, then we won't have you.
I mean, to me, the more relevant part, I think, would be if we ever really got to removal of somebody, then they certainly shouldn't be paid anymore. But, before that, I think the area is so gray that in terms of what are you being paid for and the work that goes into it. And
We're kind of stuck right now since it says 2,000 per year or annually.
Oh,
You can't really then say, well, we're going to take away something if you're not going to attend. So we'd have to probably.
but if you
redo the
removed somebody,
ordinance.
surely you wouldn't be bound to that, would you?
Oh, no, if
Yeah,
they're removed,
yeah.
no,
If they're
absolutely.
removed, but
Right.
you also have an issue if you're paying for each meeting you attend, what happens when you have additional meetings, special meetings that are called, or meetings that get canceled because of weather or holidays or whatever, then
Lack of quorum. You pay the
Yeah.
three
lack
that
of
show
quorum. Yeah, you've got all of those issues. They get paid
Into the
the
code and
money
see if
that
we
the
have
other
to tackle
people
this or
didn't
not.
get paid.
Maybe we don't have to tackle this at all. Let's hope the code says we don't.
Right.
Again,
Because you're right, commission meetings, it was all brought up as
Yeah.
far as how far do you take it? And,
It's not worth it, I don't think.
I think it's
But
all
I'm glad you
about-
brought it up. 'Cause it
We'll take
does
a
come
look
up.
at
You know,
it, though.
your issue about if you don't show up at the meetings to get paid, I mean, I think the only right rules that you're ready to enforce. And so it's hard to hold each other accountable, but
Salary's easier.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
I did have one on going back to section 2.
Oh, dear. Tim.
Just as I flip this, under the,
We have to write a procedure about how far you can go back.
Nothing.
Proceed, sir. My fault.
just
Proceed.
under the code of ethics, I had a question about UNV.
We're 2 point what?
What's your number?
Page 16, 2.22. U and V dealing with the lobbying before the government entity or lobbying on particular matters in which they participated.
That means to get paid to lobby?
I don't know, does that mean being paid? Does that mean coming and speaking about that?
I would say lobbying, my interpretation would be lobbying for
It's
money.
lobbying, yeah.
Because
It's a lobbying
the
vote.
section about public comment doesn't say if you're a previous city council person, you can't speak.
Okay, because I mean, we're a small enough town and.
Paid
you know,
lobbyist, maybe?
Yeah, if we clarified that, just because.
Sure.
There's certainly going to be, if
Yeah.
I have a business in town and I want to
Yeah.
start, or I want to start a business, I have to wait 2 years until after I'm off council before I can
Just
start a
say
business, or?
should not function as a paid lobbyist on particular matters or something.
I mean, how many lobbyists do we have here?
No, do they have to declare themselves?
I
What's
think
the-
they may have pulled this from somewhere else that
Well, I got it
had
from, there's
state.
2 or 3 different cities, and I think I tried to kind of coalesce some of those together, and so I may have just brought in, I think I brought in you through Y from another.
And on the elected official shall not, after leaving office, lobby on particular matters in which they personally participated while in office. Again, I know Dan's been working on Champions Ridge, I know Fred Rivich did on Champions Ridge, and he's continued to be that. That would, is that something that, obviously we can't
paid.
retroactively apply it, but I'm just looking at scenarios that have come up where people have been involved in either a civic activity or something.
In retrospect, I kind of feel like I wish I wouldn't have put those 2 in there, because I don't think it really applies here. But, I mean, it is what it is, and I think if you had somebody specifically that applied to, if they're gonna go out and bid for jobs, or, I mean, after they've been on the council, and I don't know if that makes any difference, maybe, I don't know.
I think I'd be more comfortable if you took those 2 out, and if it becomes an issue in the future, you can always put them back in.
I don't see a problem taking them out either, frankly, but and I don't know what the law is in Iowa, but, federally, a lobbyist is a defined term.
Yeah.
It's a work of art. So you have to be registered as a lobbyist and all of this, and if that's true in the state of Iowa, I would interpret this to mean that you cannot be a registered lobbyist to lobby for things that you had in the city. Truthfully, I can't imagine any situation where that would ever come up. I don't have a problem with taking them out, I think, just for clarity purposes, so we don't have an issue of running into a problem that we're creating that we don't have to create.
All right,
This is more freelance, amateur status lobbying. It's not the professional league. It's kind of unpaid. You lose your amateur status.
I was
you
reading
get
that
paid.
as professional lobbyist.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who has ever left this body and used that to leverage a job as a professional lobbyist.
Well, not yet.
Not yet. You have aspirations, so we better leave this in.
Okay.
I have nothing else, sir. That's all we had, unless council has anything else they'd like to go back all the way to the first chapter if you'd like to, in case something sparks some interest.
I think, Bill, you have a pretty good sense of direction on where we're going, and so we'll,
Just a question, and this is, I don't know if I remember seeing this in here or not, but I know it's things that we've talked about in the past, and it just happened to come up tonight when I, told James he was in charge of the staff, but the whole idea, within those, we have discussion about council directive to James in particular.
Well, that's
City
backfiring in a hurry, isn't it?
section.
It would, and without having read through that, but, between the whole, I mean, we had this section, we talked about, we can't direct city staff, and that's clear in there, but I can't remember if we have anything in there that specifically said individually, we can't tell James to do something.
But as a council, we can.
As a council, we can, but individually,
Vote of 4, we can.
by a vote of 4 in council chambers, but not by email saying, hey, James, you need to do this, and this has to be done.
I'm thinking there's
There
something
was
in the
something
current
in there, I
city
thought.
code that references that.
Is there an?
On 113, the first paragraph at the very end, I think it says the city administrator is responsible to the entire city council rather than to individual council members.
Good enough for me.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in 114B, it talks about what you can talk to the city administrator about. Some things.
Okay.
When we were doing the removal for, there was the ability to remove a city staff, and it was a general thing for the other one that I was doing, and I think since you appoint directors, I think this section applies to directors, and that's why we wrote it that way. And the way we look at it is the city administrator governs his staff, and that you don't necessarily have to vote on whether he can hire a mechanic.
Dear, yeah, don't bring that up.
Or any other staff
But
member.
and that's, but it is important.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
even in Waterloo,
Yep.
that's the way it is, but,
Right.
but they didn't do it that way. So it's one of those things that, yeah. And so I think that's,
Jeez, yeah.
I did that on purpose though, because I didn't want to put anything in about this group removing employees.
Okay. I think we're good. Let's move on to reports from boards and commissions. Library Board of Trustees minutes. Anything that we need to know that not in the minutes?
I just want to mention that at the last library board, there was mention made of establishing a quiet area in the public library. And I thought, in terms of what we heard from economic development, maybe that's a good pattern for the city.
Isn't that redundant?
Okay.
Have you been to the library after school?
It's not necessarily real quiet.
Library I'm used to.
Minutes received into record. Golf Commission minutes. Anything we need to know about other than not the received into record? Staff comments.
I think we're okay tonight. I don't believe we have any, sir.
Oh, yes. Okay. Council comments. Brian?
I'm good.
Rod?
Well, I just want to say how much I really enjoyed this discussion tonight. I think that to give ourselves a pat on the back, this is not easy things to talk about. And I think we've made a lot of progress here on something that is extremely important. So I enjoyed the back and forth. When people had disagreements, we could talk about our disagreements. We could come to consensus, give city staff some direction. That's the way it's supposed to work. So I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Tim? Edie?
I will just say congratulations to the Wartburg women's basketball team for winning the conference tournament, and you know, knock on wood, if they make it far enough, we'll have some championship games up in Rochester, close to home. So
How about the rest of the team? They managed to win again, too.
they won again too. Yes, yes. I shouldn't take that for granted. Yeah, at all. You know.
Very good. Ann?
Nothing to add.
Dan?
I see our two food fight chair people here, so the fight still must be on, and Tab is very,
I was not going to say anything, but it's City Hall 28 pounds, library 84 pounds right now. We're in the second of 4 weeks, so it's March 19th.
that's why you're not nervous with Sarah sitting behind you, because she's in the lead. And
Come on, public.
We
need
had
the
a
library
windfall
over.
today, so I'm anxious to see what the weights are at the end of the week.
Mike?
Yeah, I think I want to second the comment about a good discussion tonight. I had suggested to Brian, when we were both at the W, that if it were up to me, that this whole ethics thing could be summarized in one sentence, namely, behave yourself and play nice. But he thought that was a little too simple.
Well, you have a point, though. I mean, that's just so that it gives us a guidance to play nice and be nice and things, so. Okay, I'd like to thank Sharon for being guest council person for the month of February. Sharon, do you have some comments or things that you'd like to?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's very informative. I've learned a lot. I might even come to some of the meetings now.
Very good. As I heard earlier, someone says Sharon's ready to run for council.
So be careful coming to those meetings. Somebody might, recruit you to run for an office.
No way. Been there, done that. I don't want to go through that again.
And I would second Tab's comment about the food bank. Regardless of who wins, the important thing is to help provide those in need in the community, and they'll be friends. I am assuming they're friends now, and they'll be friends afterwards regardless. And as several have said, they hope it.
So if you want to enter that into the record too.
What was that?
Waverly Shell Rock beat Charles City Sub-State.
Okay, very good, thank you. Again, even though they're not here, thank the commission members that have served for their service to the community, and I really want to commend the council members and the staff for the discussion on the rules and procedures tonight. It was good, and I keep hearing comments all over the community about what's going on with this council, and you're all to be commended for those comments. So thank you very much. And again, construction season starts in 30 days, roughly, and Kramer Avenue will start March 26th. And April 1st, well, I heard the comment, the trees will be start cutting on the parkway next week. Okay. And April 1st, I expect to see equipment being moved into place before too long, so that they can,
Except I think April 1st is Easter Sunday, maybe?
well,
I'm just kidding.
something like that. But it will start on or about that time, weather permitting, and so that's all I have. Again, thank you for all of you for your attendance this evening, and we'll look forward to a meeting next Monday night. Might be a little lengthy, but we'll get through it. I might have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
I didn't think I had to read that one for you.